Okay, so everybody gives me the opportunity to kind of come out with the cheesiest line in kind of online learning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Um, Firstly, on behalf of MIT Sloan, I'd like to say thank you for the investment, the time, the energy, the resources that you've decided to put into taking this program. We know, of course, you have lots of options. So the fact that you've chosen to either continue within our kind of learning family or to join our learning family, either way, we're very grateful for that. And it's a privilege, and it's also a responsibility that we take very seriously. For those of you who, I'm just looking through the gallery here, and I have to say, this is by far the most handsome group I've seen all week. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, if I just say just a couple of words before we kind of get cracking. I'm a senior lecturer in the IT group here at MIT Sloan School of Management. I'm also something called the Digital Capability Leader for the Office of Executive Education, which means I am responsible, accountable for an online business that we run, experimentation that's linked to that. And in fact, the reason I mentioned that role is more to do with the experimentation. It's not really to do with the technology, funnily enough, or anything about online or digital. It's more to do with the business model innovation that goes alongside innovation with technology. And I'm sure as you all go through this three module program, this is kind of a question that's very much top of mind for you all. How can the insights that are being kind of shared, imparted, actually help you trigger kind of improvements and evolution of your operating model, your business model, um, planning and strategy, and really how you create value and impact with your customers and clients. So it's something we'll touch upon a little bit later in today's session, but I'm sure it's top of mind for you. And then as a senior lecturer here at Sloan, we have consulting privileges. We're entitled to spend a day per week on other activities or 20% of our time. Nobody's ever said whether that's 20% of a 40-hour or 120-hour week. So it's kind of an interestingly kind of blurry line. We do report on an annual basis who we spend our time with. I spend probably 80% of my consulting privileges with NASA Goddard, and I have done for the last 6 or 7 years. I'm responsible for AI-based economic modeling for a series of missions. So I'm actually assigned to the Da Vinci plus Venus work at the moment, but in the period of transition to some other missions as well. So that's kind of interesting. I spend some time with Google as well, and a couple of other companies, such that the insights that I have are based not only or strictly in the academic field, but kind of in terms of the practitioner and the application-based elements of all of this. So that's a tiny bit about me. Some of you may have met me before. If you have, I apologize in advance. You're kind of the repeat offenders. And very pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you today. So just before we get into this, and before I explain kind of the flow, or to be kind of instructional designery about this, kind of explain the narrative arc of where we're going over the next kind of 45 minutes. Do you mind if I just kind of pass the baton to Jay, who is the head learning facilitator for this experience? Jay, would you mind kind of saying a few words to the group?
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. First, it's great to see the engagement in the discussion forums. I've been working with these programs for a long time, and this is a new level that I'm seeing of interaction. It's fantastic. I love to see the threads with several people from all over the world sharing and exploring ideas together. And as I expected, I see a broad spectrum of experience and level of an understanding that we have coming into the program around agents, language models, and other AI tools. So, Paul, it would be great to start by covering the differences between agents and standard AI automation like copilots, GPTs, or even the AI note takers that many of us here are more
Mhm.
familiar with.
Okay, yeah, I'll be happy to do that, and thank you, thank you, Jay. Just before I do that and kind of get into the flow of the session, wanted to just reinforce a couple of key points. When here at MIT Sloan, when we're teaching around AI in particular, but teaching in general, we very much kind of take a problem first, not a technology first approach. Okay. And but by that I mean that there will be lots of vendors and third parties out there that will be speaking to you around kind of the capabilities and the potentialities and the realities of agentic AI. I don't mean to be at all kind of overly cautious, but I just want to kind of make this point or sow this particular seed. Um, when whenever we kind of fall into a trap, and I've done it myself, and not suggesting for a moment any of you would kind of do this, but this kind of technology first kind of approach ends up with us looking for problems or kind of questions that the technology can help us with. Whereas when we take a problem first approach internally inside our organizations, we're very much determining what we need to solve for and the role, if any, that AI can play. Just let me give you a quick example of what I mean. So imagine, for example, well, imagine my role, or just to take your own roles. If we were to decompose any of our kind of job roles down into their constituent component parts, research generally shows us there'll be somewhere between 15 to 25 core component elements of your job, of my job, of most of our friends here, their particular roles and jobs. So if you imagine you walk into an organization, or you're in an organization where there are 20 discretely kind of determined roles. We know, therefore, that there are 20 roles. Each of those 20 roles will likely have 20 constituent component parts, the tasks and activities that constitute that particular job as such. And so that we know that 20 times 20 gives us 400 discrete tasks and activities that are being done in that organization and constitute the work that the company does. My point to you is that as we analyze those 400 tasks and activities, part of what we're doing in this process is looking to see which of them could or should be automated, augmented, and or potentially agentically assisted with AI. So in your mind's eye, picture something, I don't know, picture something like a periodic table with 400 kind of elements, 400 discrete kind of tiles in a mosaic or something, yeah? And so if you were to assign red, green, and blue to each of the tasks or activities that could be automated, augmented, agentically assisted, you would start to build a really interesting kind of view of how work actually gets done in your organization. What I'm saying by implication here is that whenever we're working with the frontiers of generative AI, and I would call those frontiers the evolving LLMs, the multimodal systems, as well as agentic, we have to be very cognizant of a number of different related points. It's not just the technology, of course. We have to be aware that fundamentally, the decomposition of the tasks and activities and the workflows and the operating models and all the rest of it that we kind of work upon in our organization gives us a doorway into seeing where agentic AI could potentially be used effectively. But when you do that, you'll start to see almost with the different colors, the red, the greens, and the blue, a different set of rivers or a different flow of work through your organization. This is going to require, at some point, either in the near, middle, or next futures, a rethinking of the shape and size and structure of your organization. Okay. And at the same time, the curiosity and the creativity that you are all showing by taking this program and applying during the program, and I'm sure applying outside of this program as well, will mean that your organizations, or let's put it this way, it will be the organizations that recognize, reward, incentivize the capabilities and the attributes that get the most out of the technology that will succeed. Okay. Hopefully I'm not being too esoteric or abstract here. what I'm trying to say is that this isn't success with agentic AI isn't simply a case of playing around and learning how to create agentic workflows. It's going to be at a point in the very near future or present a requirement for our organization to grasp the nettle and understand that we need to think about the shape and the structure, the organizational charts, how data is flowed, how it's managed, how it's governed in our organizations, and how we fundamentally incentivize the people, me, you, everybody else, reward them such that we're kind of allowing them, giving them permission to apply the curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, all of these kind of ideas that allows us to extract the value or convert the potentiality into business impact and value. The other piece of guidance I'll give just before we kind of get into this, the way I'm going, we'll finish before we get, run out of time before we get to the Q&A. But the big point I would say as well is, as you're playing around with this, I've seen some of your kind of job titles and kind of your profiles and what have you, and we have a lot of very experienced people. Um, Professionally, your expertise and experience is immense. That has that has afforded you a critical thinking and a capability of judgment that you need to bring to your work with agentic AI. When you're messing around, playing around, piloting, practicing, expanding, scaling your agentic workflows, you will have aha types of moments, epiphanies, where you kind of think, do you know what? That's a little bit strange. That's not what I expected to see. When those moments, when you have these little aha moments, don't cast them aside, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning when you're messing about with this stuff. Make a note, think about these aha moments because these could easily be the arrowhead or the kind of a puncture point into the new metrics of value or units of measurements that are going to allow you to actually recognize and manage the value and the impact you're creating. Why do I say this? I say this because I consider agentic AI or generative AI in general, AI more broadly, to be a general purpose technology. And as such, I think it's permeating, pervading every aspect of our organizations, of society more broadly. And I think the things that allowed you all to be successful over the last 1, 3, 5, 10 years, it's going to be a subset or kind of an additional set of things that's going to enable you to be successful over the next 1, 3, 5, 10. And as such, to imagine that the legacy units of measurement and metrics of value that you hold dear in your organization today are fit for purpose for where we're going with agentic AI would be somewhat kind of naive. Yeah. And I worry that the green shoots of impact and value that you're creating already might not necessarily be organized by organizations or by companies because they don't fit into the units of measurement that were considered helpful, the KPIs, the key health indicators that were used for the legacy technology stacks that your company was built upon. Okay, so given the work that I do at MIT and NASA in particular, I'm very sensitive to this idea of units of measurement and metrics of value. If we're not measuring the right things or not recognizing the right units of measurement, then how are we going to be able to tell the real value? If we can't tell the real value, how are we going to secure longer term funding? How are our agentic AI kind of prototypes and kind of an initial kind of experiments going to kind of find a line item on next year's budget so that they're actually their value is amplified? Okay. Now, none of this, and this is true for anything we say with regard to AI, generative AI, agentic AI. There will be lots of vendors, and I speak to lots of vendors, and lots of brilliant people work for all of these organizations. I'm not trying to be at all critical, but you have one thing that they can never have. Yeah, you have the context of your organization. Only you, unfortunately, or only me in my case, only I know the reality of my problems if I'm prepared to be honest with them. Okay? The vast majority of your problems, organizationally speaking, are hiding in full view. Yeah? They're there in front of you, and they represent brilliant starting points to actually work with agentic AI and generative AI more broadly. So if somebody kind of rocks up to you with a kind of a beautiful kind of pitch deck, the first thing you should kind of think about is, well, that's a lovely pitch deck. Why is everybody else's slide so much nicer than mine, and kind of the colors match and everything else? That's a pitch deck is not a reality deck. Okay, so we have to be sensitive to that. And what I'd like to do over the next kind of 15, kind of 20 minutes or so, and then open up for Q&A, is walk you through. I was thinking about this kind of last night and this morning, and I hoped you wouldn't mind if I just put together kind of 8 questions. Here at MIT, it's one of the things that I think best or most closely defines us, most accurately defines us. We're obsessed with questions. Um, the answers can wait. Yeah, let's make sure we're asking ourselves the right questions first of all. We have a Christmas party at MIT at Sloan. Strangely enough, it was just before Christmas. I think it was December the 12th, and I was at the Christmas party, and a chap called Ramakrishnan. He's professor of the practice for AI and machine learning at Sloan. And just a little aside, I remember in a previous conversation speaking to Rama and saying, "Hey Rama, who should I follow on Twitter, X, LinkedIn, to kind of see what's going on with deep learning and all of this stuff?" And he said, Paul. He said, "Do yourself a favor and just follow me." Okay. Okay. And now this is he's a very super humble kind of guy. What he meant to say, what he meant by this was that he's already following all the super smart kind of people that we need to be interested in. So you could do a lot worse than going to LinkedIn and kind of Ramakrishnan. I'll put his name in the chat in a second, but follow him and you'll be in the right path. Going back to my original kind of story, he said to me at the Christmas party, he said, "Hey, Paul, what's the difference between a good research scientist and a brilliant research scientist?" I might have had a couple of drinks, so I wasn't kind of at my kind of sharpest. And I said, "I don't know." And he said to me, "It's the questions they're prepared to ask themselves." Then fast forward a couple of months, and I saw an interview with Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, of course. The chap who, with his teams, have brought us things like AlphaGo, AlphaFold, the protein folding, amino acid kind of folding kind of database that we can all access, etc., etc. I saw him being interviewed, and he said, and bearing in mind the work that he's done and the complexity of the work, I was astounded by this. He said it's harder to come up with the questions to ask yourself than it is the answers. Let's just think about that for a second, the implications. This is a chap who dedicated his life to understanding intelligence, or creating artificial intelligence and then using artificial intelligence to fix everything else fundamentally. Okay. And he recognizes that it's the questions. And if you think about it from an organizational perspective or an agentic AI perspective, the questions that sit behind the workflows and the use of agentic AI, the better the question you can ask yourself, the better the opportunity you have for competitive differentiation and advantage. Okay, so it's not wasting time to go for a walk kind of across the park and think about things and reflect. And in fact, whenever I feel the world is speeding up a bit too much, yeah, when I think it's spinning a bit too quickly and I'm kind of feeling a bit kind of car sick, I think it's important to kind of recognize that duality of slowing things down. Less haste, more speed. What are we solving for? How are we certain that we know what we're solving for? That the others who are working with us, that we have an aligned definition and that we're working in the same direction. So that's my kind of super long, kind of poor excuse as to why I'm framing the next slides around questions. So Jay and Sean, I'm sure the team will get a copy of these slides. Yeah, well, it's being recorded anyway, so you'll kind of see this. Okay, so I'm just going to not overly quickly, but kind of at some sort of pace, go through these 8 kind of insights. Okay, and I'd like you to kind of, as I'm going through these, you reflect upon what this question means for where you are with agentic AI, where you are in general in terms of your relationship, and what you're doing to actually boost what I would call your AI agentic AI fitness. And I don't mean fitness in terms of a gym membership, or at least I don't think I do. I think I mean AI fitness in the Darwinian sense. How are you actually becoming ever more adaptive to the environment around you when it comes to these technologies? Okay, so let's just get into it, shall we? Kind of 20 minutes of messing about. Um, okay, the seduction of the demo. I've touched upon this. None of you will be surprised by this. But what I've done in these kind of questions, you'll see the questions, and then I've given two or three or four maybe kind of just bullet points around how we might kind of decompose the question and flip it so that we kind of get in front of it a little bit and start to have some kind of some sort of reasonable defensible approach. Okay. So how should we proceed when we kind of see this potentially seductive type of demo? Are we mistaking a working demo for a working deployment? So sometimes I don't necessarily easily see the gap, and so you got to be careful about that. Um, Building a deliberate demo to production checklist. Assume always, sit on the safe side of things. Assume that the distance is greater between the prototype and the deployed kind of system than you, your team, or kind of a third party might suggest. Resist resource allocation decisions too early on. Yeah, you've got to understand. You've got to understand. It's so important that I understand, and I live this every single day. Because to give you an example, my own personal, perhaps my own personal largest use case with agentic AI is for NASA mission evaluation, yeah, to kind of get to ROI and net present value. Okay, so using agentic AI as a vehicle for the workflow associated to a stacked AI approach that uses machine learning, deep learning, reinforcement learning techniques to come up with and kind of procure and data sets provided by the company to actually kind of determine the kind of potentialities or probabilities associated to certain ROI types of outcomes. So be careful with the seduction of the demo. What I want to say, the second one here, is the workflow itself. The workflow is the unit of value. It goes back to what I was saying before. Oftentimes, at least kind of once a month, somebody will walk up to me on campus or somewhere else, and they'll say to me something along the lines of, "Hey, Paul, 2 years from now, will the job of financial analyst still be around?" Now, I'm British, yeah, so of course I don't like that kind of confrontational kind of so I don't say that. I don't say what I'm thinking. What I think is that's a useless question. I can't tell anybody the answer to that question. What we have to do is decompose it down into its constituent parts, the actual role of a financial analyst, and then, as we said before, create that almost like periodic table thing where we're determining which of the tasks and activities can be automated, augmented, or agentically assisted. And critically, whether just because they could be automated, whether we should or not. Okay. So when it comes to working with agentic AI, we almost have to kind of look at things the other way around and think about your overall workflow. Okay. So how is the decomposition part of this? So you give the agent or the agentic system a particular kind of task to execute, a particular workflow to execute. It breaks it down into its constituent component parts. It goes off out into the world, APIs, databases, goes to all these different places to complete the subcomponents, reassembles kind of parts. Now, whilst it can be true that individual components of that workflow might be being completed responsibly, safely, correctly, in high quality, the unit of measurement, the unit of value has to be the overall workflow as it's reassembled. Okay, so let's not get seduced or kind of too gravitationally pulled in that particular way. So we're looking for the end-to-end coherence, not just a single step that might be made more completed more quickly, for example. Okay, now going back to what I said before around our problems, what's the term in psychology? Dehabituation. If you can dehabituate and improve the quality of your perception in your organization. You know, for example, if you were able, irrespective of whether you've been working at your company for 5 years or for 10 years, if you can walk in tomorrow morning or this afternoon and see the company as if you were walking in there for the first time, yeah, if you can have that type of perception and identify a high value workflow that's kind of that has blockages, that has dodgy kind of handoffs, that has kind of people not following the particular kind of processing and kind of all of those types of things. Look to identify something like that as a potential kind of starting point. And when you're measuring the value that's created, measure it at the workflow kind of level. Now, I read a book once, okay, more than once actually. I've kind of read a couple. My previous academic supervisor was a chap called Eric Brynjolfsson. He's now at Stanford. The last book he wrote with his kind of partner in crime, his co-author Andy McAfee, is called Machine Platform Crowd. Okay, and Machine Platform Crowd, brilliant book, a bit long but brilliant. Okay, it explores kind of three core relationships that are at the heart of the digital economy or this stage of the digital economy. The relationship between the machines and the people, between the platforms and the products, and between the core, the people inside your organization, and the people outside of it. Now, as is often the case, because this is not a fake modesty, like I'm not trying to be humble. I'm a bit slow on the uptake. It kind of takes me a while for things to kind of get through. And I read that book and I only took one thing away from it, if I were to be honest, but it was important. The idea, not of revolution, but of recalibration. Okay. So when you think about the tasks or the activity that machine intelligence completes or human intelligence, let's not think of it. I've learned not to think of it in terms of in black and white terms, but almost shades of grey, like a number line, say 0 to 100, that you're continuously, constantly recalibrating. Okay. And with your workflows, because of this kind of flywheel of improvement and learning and the learning loops, we're always calibrating the agentic autonomy that we're kind of putting into place. We're not just kind of saying, wow, bang, go off, knock yourself out. We're kind of maintaining the orchestration and recalibrating by context, by feedback, by input, how we need to improve the system that we're working with. And so what I'm saying, it's not a kind of switch, it's a dial. Or I've never been in a music studio, but you know, you see kind of Bono and Sting and what have you. They have these mixing desks and they have all of these graphic equalizers. That's the image that I'd like you to keep in your mind, that you're all in your orchestration and your oversight and your overview and control. You're always kind of recalibrating based on the context and the results that you're seeing. Now, this is a lesson that's been kind of beaten, I wouldn't say beaten into me, but it's been kind of reinforced. It's been very much kind of hammered into me here at MIT by my colleagues, not just at Sloan, but kind of across the institute, the Schwarzman College of Computing, CSAIL, the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. Be honest about our baseline. Perfection is a problem in lots of domains and dimensions, including agentic AI and generative AI as well. What are you benchmarking against? If you set yourself kind of the benchmarking against perfection kind of thing, that can be super problematic. I don't want to appear underly kind of, not even sure that word exists, but you know, I don't want to appear unambitious as such. But I think there's a lot to be gained by having a baseline, judge the outputs of the agents against our human current performance or our human and current machine performance. We're looking for improvements. We're looking to kind of raise the bar and move up. If we're trying to get to the very top, if we're trying to pole vault kind of 5 meters or whatever it is, that's going to be. Let's be careful. Let's not set ourselves up for a fall. Let's be practical and pragmatic. And ultimately, in every single one of our organizations, we're looking to drive efficiencies and deliver improvements and impact. Okay, I say it here, kind of an 85% agentic workflow kind of performance. Do you know what? It's 15% short of perfection, but it's 3% better than the human process. It's kind of it's kind of working alongside or replacing. Okay, so these in the bullet points are just some ideas of how we should proceed with regard to baseline. Okay, now I feel very strongly about this next kind of point. I was doing some work yesterday, in fact, where I had a guy. Oh, and by the way, even though this is being recorded, we operate under Chatham House rules. Okay, so there will be times where kind of I share kind of comments and references that I would prefer you when you're if you choose to share them, don't attribute them to the person who said it or the person who it was about necessarily. But I think it's important that I'm as candid as I possibly can be with all of you. So I was in a kind of workshop with some people from IBM yesterday. They're kind of on our campus. We have a significant kind of relationship with IBM Watson at MIT. And the chap, the guy I was working with, was talking about the significance and the strategic relevance and importance of thinking about AI governance and regulation and responsibility, not at the model level, but at the system level. Okay. So I'm a big fan, and you have to pick your fans very carefully. Sorry, you have to pick your heroes very carefully. You know, there was a time, kind of particularly after he scored that goal against Greece, that David Beckham was kind of pretty high up my kind of list of heroes. But you got to be careful with people; they can kind of let you down a little bit. But when it comes to actually thinking about this question of responsibility and acting responsibly, maintain a big fan of Claude Shannon. So Claude Shannon, back in 1948 at Bell Labs, created, or in fact, it was just before that, 1940 or 38, 39. He created he did the research on what would become the threshold theorem. And the threshold theorem is at the heart, of course, of the digital economy. It basically tells us that an unreliable system can be made reliable by the wrapper and the processes that are put around it. Classic example, historically speaking, is telecoms. Okay, there's a reason kind of Claude Shannon was at Bell Labs in 1948. So I'm speaking to you now, kind of via Zoom, I think it is. Yeah, but if my family were kind of down the other side of the house here, they might be able to hear a murmur of my voice, but my voice attenuates, of course, over the kind of the 10 or 15 meter distance to the front door. Now, with kind of this idea of error detection, error correction, and the threshold theorem, the voice and the video packets kind of encoded and kind of transmitted through the kind of high capacity optical backbone, through the internet, blah, 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 using kind of apps like Zoom, the errors are detected and they're corrected in transmission in the process. Okay. So what I'm trying to say here is don't try to wait for agentic AI or AI in general to become perfect. I can't really see that ever happening actually, or kind of not in the very super near future. But instead, think about where the errors are likely to happen and then how you're going to correct them. Understand that there will be errors, there will be problems, and make sure that you understand over a period of time, but even better understanding of where the limitations kind of sit with these technologies. And where the limitations sit, that provides a signpost to where we need to be kind of investing in human capabilities and organizational kind of traits so that we can use these systems safely. Now, in my experience, you know, you can. I work kind of in the EU, in the UK, obviously in the US and what have you, and there are different kind of cultural, philosophical kind of perspectives and legal and everything else kind of perspectives with regard to technology kind of management and various acts and various kind of legislation to kind of act safely. I'm not going to get I'm not going to put myself in the middle of kind of saying whether the EU kind of AI Act versus kind of some of the stuff that we see kind of here in the US and what have you is better and best. What I am saying is that in my experience with agentic AI, with AI in general and other technologies, embracing using regulatory and governance as a scaffold for your development of these systems is a catalyst. What you don't want to do is get to a position 6 months after playing around and understand that whatever agentic workflow you've created, it steps over the parameters of what your industry or your jurisdiction will allow. Okay, so why not be super smart about this, wise even, understand the rules of the game from the beginning and build and use them as a scaffold for your development moving forward. Okay. Now, this it might not feel like this right now, given all of you will be at different stages of your journey. Some of you will have agentic AI companies, some of you will be kicking the tires. The vast majority of us will be somewhere in the middle where we're kind of experimenting and we're kind of looking to kind of grow our experiments and create value and impact. Let's not forget at any point, whilst early on in the process, it might feel that the constraints are technical. Don't underestimate how important it is to be able to integrate agentic AI with your existing kind of operations and processes, with your people and people strategies, with your organizational culture, and a broader set of change management. Okay. If in our organization we can't create the space, I mentioned this before around the way in which we incentivize, reward, recognize kind of the right behaviors that will drive kind of the value creation with something like agentic AI. We've got to think kind of, you've got to be able to do this almost like a pointillist artist. When we were kids and adults as well, do you remember that you go to kind of museums or you go to the cathedrals, and when your nose is right up against the mosaic, you can see the color of the tiles, but it's only when you step back you see the bigger picture. Do yourself a favor, regularly take a few steps back. If you take a few steps back, kind of come out of the kind of all of the code and different stuff and think, well, kind of what picture are we actually building here? If you can't bring your organization or create an organization that will accommodate this type of work, it's going to be hard work. Okay. So the bullet points here, you'll have these slides, you can kind of walk and talk through all of these. Now, I mentioned, and I'll mention it again under kind of Chatham House rules, I hang out to spend some time. And in fact, that wasn't meant to be a pun of any sorts. I hang out at Google kind of thing. So I spend some time there. And I'll just give you a kind of an example of a recent conversation. What one of my friends there was kind of saying, we were shooting the breeze. We were just having a cup of tea before we recorded something. And she said to me, hey, kind of my boss came into work kind of this morning, and he said over the weekend he built this agentic thing, and he asked 6 or 8 of us to get together at 11 o'clock kind of the next morning to kick the tires of it, to review it, to have a look at it, and see what people thought. And I said, well, what was it about? What was it like? And she said, oh, it didn't work properly. It was rubbish. There were some interesting ideas, but nothing, but it kind of. But what was interesting about, there were 2 things that were interesting. Firstly, that she was talking about a development cycle that was 3 days in length. With generative AI, about 6 months ago, I would hear CXO teams or kind of operations teams talking about 3 week, 4 week, 5 week, 6 week kind of minimum viable product, kind of, prototyping types of experiments. A year ago, 18 months ago, I was hearing kind of business leaders talk about kind of 3 months to 6 months. So what I've seen over the space of a year is a compression or a concertinaing of this kind of innovation cycle or this prototyping cycle from 3 months to 3 weeks to 3 days. Okay. Now I'm starting to kind of think that this, or I've come to the understanding that this is becoming an organizational discipline and capability. It's not as reckless as it sounds, as long as you have the critical thinking, the critical judgment to stop the things that aren't providing value, to extract the value from an agentic kind of experimental prototype, and then reuse that in your next set of experiments. One of the biggest challenges we're all going to have, if we're not having already, is a kind of a common organizational inability to kill things that don't work. It's very easy with agentic AI to get started. You can knock out kind of, interesting kind of demos, prototypes, and everything else. But we've got to be super careful that we're as disciplined in what we stop doing as we are in terms of what we start doing. Okay. The world, every organization, frankly, that I walk into has projects, has products that should have been discontinued 5 years ago. Yeah. They weren't, let's be honest about it, because they either had senior executive sponsorship, people didn't want to kind of grasp the nettle of the politics around a particular product. It might have been successful 10 years ago, so now it's kind of given a bit of grace. Yeah, it's kind of allowed to get away with rules that other kind of projects aren't kind of allowed to kind of work with. So this type of idea, think about the discipline that you're building around your kind of MVP and prototyping type of cycle. Now, this is something you'll learn more about kind of as the program. I think module two is released kind of just after we finish this, 10 o'clock. Yeah, 10 o'clock, I think. So let me just think for a moment. Yep. So you'll meet one of my colleagues, Tim Krasker, yeah, and Tim will kind of provide kind of all the color and the kind of details of this type of approach. So to be thinking around where are we actually going with agentic AI? Okay, what does it mean in the context of software engineering, of software development? Um, Recognize this kind of shift to the ontology of actually working with agentic AI. Now, to what degree, to which degree, pay attention to all of this around where we're actually heading in terms of the role and the responsibilities, the impact and the value that agentic AI is going to be providing. So, in essence, everybody, I know I've spoken kind of at you a little bit, but hopefully this is kind of grounded, kind of practical kind of points of view for you to reflect upon. The most important thing that, from my perspective and on behalf of MIT, actually, there are two things. One is that you really develop this kind of questioning muscle. And then secondly, which I should have said at the very beginning, I mean, why do I do this? There's lots of other stuff that I could reasonably perhaps do. Why do my friends, colleagues, why do the dean's office, why does MIT kind of try to build programs like this and put them out there to the world? It's because we know that we can only have a certain amount of impact. It's you taking the things that we put into these types of programs, reflecting upon them, applying your context, and then rippling out the kind of the impact and the value across the world. Yeah. So you are, and I say this with, complete seriousness. You're a massively important part of our family. Without you, we cannot deliver on our mission to create these principled, innovative leaders who will have a positive impact in the world. And that might sound like, okay, isn't that pithy? Isn't that pretty? Actually, no, it's not pithy or pretty. It's actually really hard. Yeah. And so we can't do it on our own. And that's why we kind of invite you to kind of be part of all of this. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully, it's been um, useful of sorts. I've got five minutes before I need to go to class. Um, if anybody has any kind of questions, thoughts, observations, complaints, actually, no, the complaints go to Jay. No, actually, the complaints go to Sean. Yeah, we'll let Sean deal with all of that. But feel free to come off mute, kind of, and throw kind of a metaphorical shoe at me. Sarah.
I had a question in the chat, but it's about
Yeah,
AI ready data and
yeah,
just making our data AI ready. It's been a huge effort
yeah,
just for one department. And
yeah,
so I was wondering if you have any recommendations. I know,
yeah.
AI itself can help us reconfigure some things, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I've spent a bit of time, haven't I, talking about the framing of the task and what I want to solve for. The cold, brutal reality is that kind of whether it's machine learning, deep learning, kind of all this type of stuff doing here, that there are three aspects, there are three components to kind of what we're doing. We have to kind of set the task, what we're solving for. We have to have the right data, the data that we require, and they have to pick the right learning model and algorithms to work the data to make progress against the actual solution. I think one of the massive problems I see is that we need, and please don't quote me on this because it's kind of a bit too poetic, but it's almost as if we need to think of data as a river as it flows through our organizations. What happens in most organizations that I'm involved with today, I'm not saying it happens at yours, but most that I interface with, they actually kind of have these reservoir dam things, or they have these walls, and the data doesn't flow properly. Ultimately, everything begins and ends with your data. Yeah. And I was talking to one of these public investment funds, the kind of Saudi kind of UAE types of things. And they were saying to me, hey, what type of person should we hire to be our chief AI officer? And I made the point to them, you have to have somebody who can track and kind of canoe down that data river as it passes through the different parts of the organization. Any organization that has these silo things with its data is going to get itself into trouble. Or it's not going to, that's not fair. It's not going to be able to optimize the potentialities of AI. Can we go with Elizabeth? Then we'll go with Shri, and I'll try to be shorter in my answers. Elizabeth.
Yes, hi.
Hey.
There was a really good question in the chat that I wanted to elevate,
Yep.
which was a person asked about rather than thinking of things in terms of AI first, AI native,
Yep.
thinking rather in terms of process first, AI second. So the idea is that
Yep.
processes are primary and then you use AI to facilitate them. And I wanted to see how
Yep.
you were thinking about that.
I love it, as long as we're asking ourselves the question that is this the best process? Is this the best process for that particular kind of outcome? Okay. Let's not forget that kind of with all of these kind of AI tools, we kind of got a whole new kind of toolkit and kind of helping hand. So we can go after bigger and better problems, and therefore the process needs to be tweaked or improved to actually reflect the what we can actually achieve. But yes, I couldn't agree more on that particular point. Shri?
Hi, Paul.
Hey.
Uh, just want to explore further on the could versus should,
Yeah, yeah,
apart from just ethical, but I think it was great to hear about your economics work, that, economics will play a big part also in this could versus should, apart from
yeah,
obviously, is it the right thing to do? So,
yeah,
what is the emerging themes? And I guess, again, it's a fast evolving field, but how do we kind of
yeah,
start having some heuristics around this? And what is the ROI made up of?
yeah.
Input tokens, output tokens, costs, something around that. Plus, equally with their different kind of things like LLM plus RAG, SLM,
Yeah,
sovereign AI, deployment strategies. There's a
yeah,
lot of jargon. How
yeah,
do you, because an
yeah.
organization can't deal with complexity in my experience. So how do you
Yeah.
then start giving them some rules of thumb rules
Okay.
or some nuggets?
So everything I say here will be related to you, Shrey, and to kind of the group that we have here. Then you can decide kind of how you ripple it
Mhm.
out to kind of others in your organization. My responsibility right here and now is to all of you. The big thing for me, or the way that I look at it, the way I find myself most often looking at this, just because you can do something or could do something, it doesn't mean that you should do it. And the way that I kind of explain it to myself is that oftentimes there are tasks or activities in a workflow that can be automated, but on the surface, that looks like a good idea. But beneath the surface, those tasks and activities are actually related to something upstream, downstream that's actually more strategic. Yeah. And taking them out or kind of changing the way that they operate within a workflow can actually deflate your tires more than it inflates them, okay, to a degree. And then when it comes to the jargon, I think it's super important, and this has been my kind of modus operandi for the 13, 14 years I've been at MIT, but also before that. I always go back and read the work of the pioneers, the people who created the field, as a starting point, because they often write with a clarity around the question they're solving for. It's almost kind of philosophical. If you go as far back as Alan Turing and these types of people, these things are beautifully written because the jargon hasn't yet been created to hide behind. Okay, you got to try and de-jargonize kind of stuff, And so you've got to understand your organization's language, how it communicates, and make sure that how you're talking and listening is at the same frequency. Otherwise, things get lost in translation. You don't have alignment, minimize ROI, and everything kind of starts to kind of unravel. Okay. We'll go. I can take 1.5 more questions. Ahmad.
All right. I think you answered while you're taking Shrey's question. So if you can't build something, then you shouldn't build it. But I still want to ask my question. So,
Go for it. Yeah.
So if an agent can standardize a process but not necessarily improve KPIs,
Yep.
how do I sell it, and should I even sell it?
Yeah, well, this it goes back to what I said before as well. I'm not sure kind of we've got the right KPIs or all the KPIs that we need, okay, and the key health indicators. But you've got to play the game, and there's a bit of an innovation game, isn't there? Where in order move from the imitation game into the innovation game. Like if you want to be successful, you have to understand what your organization considers to be valuable and do your very best with a data-driven type of way to win these types of arguments around where value is created. If you can bring some customers along with you and they can see the value and they're prepared to reinforce where you see the value, then you're onto a good thing. Okay. But let's not hold too tight onto the existing KPIs and units of measurement metrics of value, because then they're not going to be enough. And organizations that kind of really ring fence or kind of force you to operate within those confines or those parameters, they're not going to get the most out of this technology. Okay. Now, could I ask a favor in terms of the kind of outstanding questions, just because I've got to run to class? Fatima Zara, would you ask me the question? And then the other.
Hello. Thank you for this presentation. So my question is about a standard framework. Is there any standard framework that we can use to industrialize the methodology?
I would be careful with that, because I'll send some. I'll send some over to Sean and to Jay, some of the ones that I work with. I work with a lot of kind of Claude and Google and kind of some others as well. So I'll send, and we'll kind of add those as supplemental kind of materials to module 2. Okay, I'll work with the team to get those added. But yeah, I think you have to play around. You have to test things out and mess about. Isidore, I'm super sorry. I'm going to get in trouble if I'm late. I've got to get down the hallway. I'm super sorry.
Okay.
Would you mind kind of letting Jay and Sean know, and I promise I'll kind of get the answer to you.
Okay, thank you.
And if anybody would like to reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever and hit me with questions, I love the questions. Okay, so don't ever feel bad about sending me questions, because that's how I learn. Okay, so what I'd like to say is good luck with module 2 and the rest of the program. Please keep in touch. Look, all the very best, okay, and take care with everything that you do. Kind of, we're living in difficult times, so hopefully everybody's safe and kind of well. Take care, enjoy the program, and help us out by kind of having a big impact in the world. Don't just be good, be brilliant, okay? Just kind of whatever you've got on your mind, just do it, okay? And I'm going to run. Speak to you soon. Thank you.